Good day to you. This sermon recap is for Proper 21, the year B, the year of Mark, preached at University Lutheran in Eau Claire, Wisconsin on September 30th, the year 2012. Let me get you the marked text in front of us this morning. We continue where we've been in the Gospel of Mark, this momentum that Mark is building between the inclusion of folks that have been thought to be unclean and excluded, and the disciples arguing about who's the greatest amongst them, amongst the folks that they've met, maybe, the transfiguration. Mark chapter 9, verse 38. John said to Jesus, "Teacher, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he was not following us." But Jesus said, "Do not stop him, for no one who does a deed of power in my name will be able soon afterward to speak evil of me. Whoever is not against us is for us. For truly I tell you, whoever gives you a cup of cold water to drink because you bear the name of Christ will by no means lose a reward. If any of you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believes in me, it would be better for you to have a great millstone hung around your neck and that you were thrown into the sea. If your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life maimed than to have two hands and to go to hell, to the unquenchable fire. And if your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life lame than to have 2 feet and be thrown into hell. And if your eye causes you to stumble, tear it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with one eye than to have 2 eyes and to be thrown into hell, where the worm never dies and the fire is never quenched. For everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good, but if salt has lost its saltiness, how can you season it? Have salt within yourself and be at peace with one another." Let me give credit where credit is due. I began with a poem by Mary Oliver called "The Musical Notation 2 from Thirst." It was a poem read within a sermon preached by Dale Chesley of Good Shepherd in Ashland, Wisconsin, this past week at the Fall Theological Conference. Here's the poem. Everything is God's. Everything is God's. The door jamb, the wood stacked near the door, the leaves blown upon the path that leads to the door, the trees that are dropping their leaves, the wind that is stripping them this way and that way, the clouds that are high above them, the stars that are sleeping now beyond the clouds, and simply said, all the rest. When I open the door, I am so sure all this will be there, and it is. I look around, I fill my arms with firewood, I turn and enter his house and close his door. This sense that everything is God's. And so whenever, however someone gives a cup of cold water because you bear the name of Christ, a really unique phrase in Mark and in all the Gospels, whenever someone gives you a cup of cold water because you bear the name of Christ, that one will not lose your reward. What is that reward? What is Jesus driving at? Here's the simple question for yesterday. Why is it that God asks us to give of ourselves? Does God need us? And the first answer, of course, to that question, depending on how carefully you phrase it, why is it that God asks you to give of yourself the things that God has given you? Why is it that God needs you to give of yourself? The first answer is God does not need you. God does not need to give for you to give of your money if you do not wish to. God does not need of you to heal or to exorcise or to forgive if you do not want to. God does not need for you to give a glass of water because all water belongs to God. Stream and creek and river and lake and ocean and sea all belongs to God. So God is not in need of you to give anything. God is not in need of you. God does not need for you to give hope or faith or love if you do not wish to share it. Who would want that kind of love? Who would want that kind of hope that somehow you were obligated or somehow coerced into giving it? Who would want to be loved like that when all of faith, hope, and love belong to God anyway? So that's the first answer. God is not in need of you to do these things. So again, to ask the question more carefully, then why is it that you're asked? Have you ever thought that? Just an honest thought. Why is it that God asked you to give of yourself the things that God has already granted you. And there might be different answers to that question. I'm open to that. But at least for yesterday, the answer was gladness or joy. That God asks us to give of ourselves for the joy of the one who gives. Now I'm not gonna argue. It's a different sermon altogether. That probably the most important thing is that when someone gives bread to the hungry, is that the hungry eat. Or that when someone gives a glass of water to the thirsty, is that the thirsty get to drink. Or that we drill a well somewhere that a whole village might get water. Or that we give a mosquito net, that someone might be prevented from getting malaria. That's the most important thing, without a doubt. When you go to see someone in prison, or visit the sick, or heal someone, the healing and the visiting and the love of the one who receives it is perhaps the greatest gift. This isn't to somehow be narcissistic in how we give, but there is a joy that God grants in the giving, that there is no way to understand the joy than the fact that we give. That God asks us to give of that which God has already given us, so that the giver might receive this profound joy. And so in the ministry that is this place of University Lutheran, yesterday being a part of homecoming week, and so a lot of the alumni dressed in t-shirts and their degrees and their areas of study on their name tag, that we celebrate being a people, both student, current at the university, and folks that span 10 years and 20 years and 30 years of being part of this university and part of this congregation. That the joy of giving of ourselves in the ministry, so that these students have a place to be and to hear of Christ and the good news. If that joy isn't there, if that joy isn't the thing that somehow takes up the space between the giver and the receiver, the giver and the giving, then something different happens when we're somehow asked to give, that we begin to measure. That this Gospel of Mark, this profound scope of what Jesus says, from someone who is casting out demons to someone who gives a cup of cold water, the span, the breadth and the depth and the length of who we are and what God asks us to give, if there's no joy in that, then suddenly we stop measuring the joy and we begin measuring my giftedness, my ability to give, the worthiness of the one who's to receive. And Mark has been all through this. Who is the greatest? The disciples argue who is the greatest, and Jesus has this conversation with the Syrophoenician woman and gives a crumb of bread. We begin to measure then not only my gift and the worthiness of the receiver, but then we begin to look at one another with suspicion, that we begin to measure my ministry with the ministry of that one, and we try to decide who's greater and who's least. That one's casting out demons and he doesn't, or she doesn't belong to us. So that we've got to get to the place that in an honest question, in an honest place of who we are, not merely a sermon about giving. It's not a stewardship sleight of hand here, but an honest question of why it is that we live and give and hope and faith and love. Why it is that we give offering. The question behind that is a stewarding of the mysteries of God. The stewarding of the mystery that is us together. The stewarding of the mysteries that is of those who do not belong to us. In this congregation, in this faith, in this community, in this country, on and on. That in between the one who gives and the one who receives, in between the giver and the gift itself, is this joy in knowing the Christ, and the Christ who bids us to give and to heal and to mourn with one another, and to give a cup of cold water, and to forgive and to hope and to faith together. And the joy of that is enough. The joy of that is that which takes up the place of the thing given. If not, then we begin to toss stumbling blocks. There's all kinds of rock image in this that I didn't play with. This millstone, this great donkey stone, literally, is the one that the mule would drag around in grinding the grain. It's an ass stone hung around your neck. And then these scandalons, these stumbling stones that you would in sandaled feet stub your toe on and cause you great pain, great suffering, that we begin to cast those in front of one another, because we are not caught up in the joy of what we are and who we are in Christ and what we offer to one another, but instead we're caught up in whether my gift is enough or your gift is enough or the one who receives it is worthy. Do you see the importance of where we look? Told a funny little story that Linnell and I'm beginning to move some things from my home to her home and have this borrowed this trailer, and the trailer has this drop down back end that becomes a ramp. And so she and I had carried some things into the trailer, and we were beginning to visit about some things, what's next, where to move something, and so on and so forth. And I'm standing with stocking feet on the back of this trailer ramp, which is wood, very slippery, and instantly my feet go out from underneath of me. And so down I go onto the ramp, which then I roll 2 or 3 times off the ramp, depending on who you ask, who witnessed it. But went rolling down the ramp and then ended up there on the ground. And in that instant, at my age, that you stop worrying necessarily about who saw you fall, but that you pause instantly to take an inventory of body parts and whether you're injured or if you've broken your cell phone and all those kinds of important things. And Linnell, in an instant, was very concerned that I had fallen or that I had hurt myself, but that instant passed very quickly. It was a short-lived moment of sincere concern, because the vision of me falling and rolling and landing was to her extremely funny. And so she spent the next 15 minutes with tears in her eyes, streaming down her cheeks at the vision of me, the memory of me rolling down this trailer. That there's something in all of us that we find in harmless ways. The misfortunes of another funny, and then that's what's made Funniest Home Videos what it is. But in the church, that we have to be careful in sharing the peace, that we have to be careful in asking of God's mercy, that we have to be careful, joyful. That's the better way, that we have to be joyful in that which we share, so that from the largest, grandest pieces of who we are, in ministry, in love for one another, but even in the smallest, tiniest gestures, because we bear the name of Christ and because another bears the name of Christ, in joy, that we share who we are. Grace to you and peace in all things. Be well.